What if Vader and Anakin fought for Luke's soul? Let's explore the depths of this scenario in the video. The Imperial throne room aboard the second Death Star pulses with malevolent energy as Emperor Palpatine sits upon his obsidian chair, his yellow eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure. Below, through the massive viewport, the Battle of Endor rages in all its terrible glory. Rebel and Imperial starships dance their deadly ballet among the stars, while on the forest moon below, Luke knows his friends are fighting desperately to destroy the shield generator that protects this ultimate weapon. Luke Skywalker stands defiant before the Emperor, his lightsaber clipped to his belt, but his hands steady at his sides. Every fiber of his being screams that this is wrong, that he should not be here, that facing Palpatine was exactly what the Emperor wanted. Yet here he stands, drawn by love for his father, and the desperate hope that somewhere within Darth Vader's mechanical shell, Anakin Skywalker still lives. Young Skywalker, Palpatine's voice drips with mock concern, each word carefully calculated to twist the knife deeper. You have traveled far and sacrificed much to reach this moment. Your friends, even now, walk into a trap that will destroy them utterly. The shield generator they seek to destroy is heavily defended by an entire legion of my best troops. And here, your precious rebel fleet flies helplessly into a fully operational battle station. The Emperor's lips curl into a grotesque smile. Perhaps you should have stayed hidden on that pathetic swamp world with your master. Luke's jaw tightens, but he refuses to take the bait. Your overconfidence is your weakness, Emperor. My friends will succeed, and this Death Star will fall just as the first one did. Will they? Palpatine's voice becomes a whisper, yet somehow it fills the vast chamber. Even now, I can feel their fear, their desperation. The Ewoks they counted on for aid are primitive creatures, easily overwhelmed by superior technology. Han Solo rushes headlong into danger, as he always does, driven by emotion rather than strategy. Princess Leia fights bravely. But what can one woman do against impossible odds? The Emperor's eyes narrow. And you, the great hope of the Jedi, stand here powerless to help them, just as you were powerless to help your friends in Cloud City. The mention of Bespin sends a spike of anger through Luke's chest. He remembers the carbon freezing chamber, Han's agonized face as he was lowered into the carbonite, Leia's desperate cry of, "I love you," and Han's response, "I know." He remembers the lightsaber duel with Vader, the revelation of his parentage, the choice between death and the impossible truth. Your anger serves you well, Palpatine continues, sensing the turmoil within the young Jedi. It gives you focus, makes you stronger. Even now, I can feel your hate for me growing. Good. Use it. Let it flow through you, and strike me down. Take your father's place at my side, and together we will rule the galaxy as grandfather and grandson. Behind the Emperor, motionless as a statue, Darth Vader observes the exchange. His breathing apparatus creates its rhythmic mechanical sound, steady and implacable as a funeral march. Through the Force, Luke can feel his father's presence. But it's like trying to grasp smoke. There's something there, some flicker of the man Vader once was. But it's buried so deep beneath layers of mechanical augmentation and dark side corruption that Luke isn't even sure his father can feel it anymore. "I will never turn to the dark side," Luke says, his voice steady, despite the storm of emotions within him. My father turned because he was afraid, because he was manipulated by lies and half-truths. But I know who you really are, Palpatine. I know what you did to him, to the Republic, to the Jedi. Your power comes from deception and fear, but that's not real strength. The Emperor's expression shifts, amusement giving way to something colder, more calculating. Is that what you believe? That your father was some innocent victim? How charmingly naive. Shall I tell you the truth about Anakin Skywalker's fall? He came to me, young Jedi. He sought me out, begged me for the power to save those he loved. Every choice he made, every atrocity he committed, was his own. I simply showed him possibilities. Luke's hands clench into fists, but he forces himself to remain calm. You preyed on his fear. You manipulated a young man who had lost his mother, who was afraid of losing his wife. That's not choice. That's exploitation. Such touching faith in your father's inherent goodness. Palpatine muses, rising from his throne with predatory grace. But tell me, young Skywalker, if Anakin Skywalker truly still existed within Vader, wouldn't he have turned against me by now? It has been over 20 years since Mustafar, 20 years of serving me loyally, of hunting down and destroying the remaining Jedi, of enforcing my will across the galaxy. If any spark of your precious father remained, surely it would have manifested by now. The words hit Luke like physical blows, because there's truth in them. How many innocents has Vader killed in the Emperor's service? How many worlds has he conquered? How many rebellions has he crushed? Luke thinks of Captain Antilles, strangled aboard the Tantive IV. He thinks of Obi-Wan, cut down before his eyes. He thinks of all the rebel pilots who have died, screaming as Vader's TIE fighter tore through their ranks. You think you can save him? Palpatine continues, descending the steps of his throne like a spider approaching a trapped fly. But salvation requires repentance, and the dead cannot repent. Anakin Skywalker died on Mustafar, consumed by his own hatred and fear. What remains is my creation, my apprentice, my enforcer. Darth Vader serves me not because he is compelled to, but because he chooses to. Because the dark side has shown him truths that the Jedi were too weak to accept. Luke looks past the Emperor to his father, searching for any sign that Palpatine's words are lies. But Vader remains silent, unmoved, his mask betraying nothing of whatever thoughts might exist beneath it. For a moment, Luke feels doubt creeping in. What if the Emperor is right? What if there really is nothing left of Anakin Skywalker to save? I can sense your doubt, Palpatine says with evident satisfaction. Good. Doubt is the beginning of wisdom. The Jedi filled your head with romantic notions about redemption and the power of love. But the universe is not a fairy tale, young Skywalker. Some choices cannot be undone. Some paths lead to destinations from which there is no return. The Emperor stops just a few feet from Luke, close enough that the young Jedi can smell the corruption that seems to emanate from the Sith Lord's very pores. But you still have choices to make. You can cling to your childish fantasies about saving your father and watch your friends die for your naivety. Or you can embrace reality, embrace your destiny, and take your place as my new apprentice. With your power and my knowledge, we can bring order to this chaotic galaxy. We can end the wars, the suffering, the endless cycle of conflict that has plagued civilized worlds for millennia? By becoming tyrants? Luke asks, though his voice lacks some of its earlier conviction. By becoming leaders, Palpatine corrects. By making the hard choices that weak men are afraid to make. Do you think the Senate could have dealt with the separatist crisis? Do you think democracy could have ended the Clone Wars? It was my strength, my willingness to seize power, when others hesitated, that brought peace to 1,000 worlds. Peace through oppression, Luke counters. Peace through fear. Peace through strength. The Emperor replies smoothly. Tell me, young Jedi, in the years since the Empire's formation, how many wars have consumed the galaxy? How many systems have suffered the devastation of widespread conflict? Compare that to the chaos of the Republic's final years, when Jedi generals led clone armies in battles that consumed entire worlds. Which system truly served the people better? The question hangs in the air like a challenge, and Luke finds himself without an easy answer. The Emperor's words contain uncomfortable truths. The Clone Wars had been devastating, consuming resources and lives on a scale that dwarfed anything the rebellion had attempted. And while the Empire was authoritarian and cruel, it had maintained a kind of stability across the galaxy. I can see you beginning to understand, Palpatine says with quiet satisfaction. The Jedi taught you to see the world in simple terms, light and dark, good and evil. But reality is more complex than their naive philosophy could comprehend. Sometimes evil methods serve good ends. Sometimes cruelty prevents greater suffering. Sometimes the greatest kindness is to make the choices that others lack the strength to make. Luke's hand drifts toward his lightsaber, not to draw it, but simply to feel its familiar weight. The weapon had been his anchor through so many trials, a reminder of what he fought for and who he was meant to become. But now, faced with the Emperor's relentless logic and his father's silent complicity, even that comfort seems inadequate. You want to strike me down, Palpatine observes with evident pleasure. I can feel your anger growing. Good. Let it grow. Let it consume your doubts and fears. Anger will give you the strength to do what must be done, to make the choices that love and compassion are too weak to make. I'm not angry. Luke lies, though his voice betrays him. Of course you are, the Emperor says with a cold smile. You're angry at me for corrupting your father. You're angry at the universe for forcing you into this position. You're angry at your friends for being too weak to protect themselves. And most of all, you're angry at yourself for not being strong enough to change any of it. Palpatine's voice drops to a whisper. But you can change it, Luke. You can have the power to protect everyone you care about, to reshape the galaxy according to your will. All you have to do is stop fighting what you know to be true. Luke closes his eyes, trying to center himself in the Force as Yoda taught him. But even that refuge feels compromised now. Through the Force, he can sense the battle raging around the Death Star, can feel the fear and desperation of the rebel pilots as they realize they're flying into a trap. He can sense his friends on Endor, fighting against overwhelming odds with characteristic courage but insufficient strength. Yes, Palpatine hisses. Feel their pain, feel their fear, and know that you have the power to end it. One stroke of your lightsaber, and the Emperor dies. one moment of strength, and you can save everyone you love. Luke's eyes snap open, and his hand moves to his weapon. The lightsaber springs to life with its familiar snap hiss, the blue blade humming with contained energy. For a moment, the throne room is filled with azure light, and Luke can see something like triumph in the Emperor's yellow eyes. "Excellent," Palpatine says, spreading his arms wide as if welcoming an embrace. "Now fulfill your destiny. Strike me down and take your place as the new Dark Lord of the Sith." But Luke doesn't strike. Instead, he looks past the Emperor to his father, searching Vader's mask for any sign of the man who once lived within it. "I know there's still good in you," he says, his voice carrying across the throne room like a plea. "I can feel it. You were Anakin Skywalker once, and that man still exists somewhere inside you." Vader's breathing changes slightly, the mechanical rhythm faltering for just a moment before resuming its steady pace. It's such a small thing that anyone else might have missed it, but Luke clings to it like a lifeline. "The Emperor never had to turn you," Luke continues, deactivating his lightsaber, but keeping it ready in his hand. "You turned yourself out of fear and desperation, but that was your choice, which means you can make a different choice now. You can choose to remember who you were before the fear took hold." "Touching," Palpatine says with evident disdain, "but ultimately pointless. Lord Vader serves me willingly. His loyalty is absolute. His commitment to the dark side complete. Your father, if he ever truly existed, is dead and buried on Mustafar. Then you won't mind if I try to prove you wrong," Luke says, taking a step toward his father. "By all means," the Emperor replies with a gesture of mock generosity. "Waste what little time remains to you in futile attempts to resurrect a ghost. It will make your eventual fall all the more satisfying." Luke ignores the Emperor's taunts and focuses entirely on his father. Through the Force, he reaches out, not trying to manipulate or control, but simply trying to connect. At first, there's nothing but the familiar wall of dark side energy that has surrounded Vader for as long as Luke has known him. But then, almost too faint to detect, Luke feels something else. A flicker of recognition, a momentary crack in the armor that is more than mere durasteel and electronics. "I know you can hear me," Luke says softly. "I know you remember what it was like before. You had a name, a life, people you loved. You were going to be a father. You were going to raise children with the woman you loved. Show them the galaxy. Teach them to be strong and kind and brave." Vader's breathing hitches again, more noticeably this time. Behind his mask, invisible to all observers, something stirs in the darkness that has consumed Anakin Skywalker for more than 2 decades. "You loved her," Luke continues, taking another step closer. "Padme Amidala, you loved her so much that you were willing to do anything to save her, even turn against everything you believed in. But you didn't save her, did you? The very power you sought to protect her ended up destroying her." Enough. Vader speaks for the first time since Luke entered the throne room, his voice carrying a warning that would have silenced lesser men. But Luke is not a lesser man, and he has come too far to be deterred by threats. "You killed her," he says, the words cutting through the throne room like a blade. "Not directly, but your choices, your actions, your turn to the dark side. That's what killed her. And you've spent 20 years trying to convince yourself that it was necessary, that it was somehow her fault or the Jedi's fault or anyone's fault but your own. You know nothing. Vader snarls, his hand moving to his lightsaber hilt. I know everything, Luke replies, his voice growing stronger with each word. I know because I've felt the same temptation. I've stood where you stood, faced with the possibility of losing someone I love, and I've felt that desperate hunger for power. But I also know something you've forgotten. Love isn't about control. It's about letting go. The throne room falls silent, except for the sounds of the space battle outside and Vader's mechanical breathing. Even the Emperor seems to be watching this exchange with greater interest than before, as if sensing that something significant is happening. Luke takes another step toward his father, close enough now that he could reach out and touch the black armor if he chose to. You don't have to carry this anymore, he says quietly. The guilt, the anger, the hatred. You don't have to be Darth Vader anymore. You can choose to remember who you were before the fear took hold. You can choose to be Anakin Skywalker again. For a moment, something shifts in the force around them. The oppressive weight of dark side energy that has dominated the throne room since Luke's arrival seems to waver like a candle flame in a sudden breeze. Through his connection to the Force, Luke senses something he has never felt from his father before. Uncertainty. But then Vader's lightsaber ignites with a crimson snap hiss, and the moment passes. You are naive, boy, Vader says, raising his weapon between them. Anakin Skywalker was weak. His compassion was a flaw that led to failure and loss. I destroyed him so that I could become strong enough to serve my master's will. No, Luke says, not backing down despite the threat of the red blade just inches from his chest. You buried him because you couldn't face what you had done. You created Darth Vader as a way to escape the responsibility for Anakin's choices. But you can't escape yourself forever. Vader's blade trembles almost imperceptibly, and Luke presses his advantage. I know about the dreams, he says, though he's guessing based on what he's learned about the Force and the nature of suppressed memories. I know that sometimes, when your guard is down, you remember her voice. You remember what it felt like to hold her, to hear her laugh, to imagine the future you could have had together. Silence! Vader roars, swinging his lightsaber in a vicious arc that Luke barely dodges. Luke's own lightsaber springs to life, its blue blade intercepting the red one in a shower of sparks. You remember the children you never got to hold, he continues, pressing his attack despite the danger. You remember wondering if they would have had her eyes or your hair, whether they would have grown up to be pilots or politicians or something entirely different. Their lightsabers clash again and again, the sound echoing through the throne room like thunder. But this is different from their duel on Cloud City. Then, Vader had been in complete control, toying with Luke like a cat with a mouse. Now, Luke can sense something different in his father's fighting style. There's desperation there, a frantic energy that speaks of internal conflict rather than confident superiority. You loved them before you ever met them, Luke says, ducking under a horizontal slash and riposting with an upward strike that Vader barely parries. You spent hours talking to Padme's belly, telling your unborn children about the galaxy you wanted to show them. You made plans, had dreams, imagined yourself teaching them to pilot a speeder or use the Force. They died with her. Vader snarls, his attacks becoming more wild, less controlled. They died because of Jedi lies and Republic corruption. They died because you chose the dark side, Luke shouts back, their blades locked together in a contest of strength and will. They died because you were afraid, and you let that fear turn you into something Padme couldn't recognize. The clash of lightsabers intensifies, but Luke can sense that something fundamental has changed in the nature of their conflict. This isn't a simple battle between Jedi and Sith, between rebellion and empire. This is a son trying desperately to reach his father, and a father fighting just as desperately to avoid facing the truth of what he has become. But they didn't die, Luke says suddenly, disengaging from the blade lock and stepping back. Leia and I survived. We're here. We're the children you dreamed about. The future you and Padme planned together. We're proof that some part of you is still worth saving. Vader freezes, his lightsaber held motionless in the air. For a long moment, the only sound in the throne room is his mechanical breathing, each inhalation and exhalation seeming to echo with 20 years of buried pain and regret. "Look at me," Luke says, deactivating his lightsaber and standing defenseless before his father. "Really look at me. I have her compassion and your strength. Leia has her courage and your stubbornness. We're everything you and Padme ever hoped for in your children. And we're here because some part of you was strong enough to let us live." The red lightsaber in Vader's hand begins to waver, its blade flickering like a dying flame. Behind the mask, Luke can sense a war being fought in his father's mind and heart. 2 decades of carefully constructed justifications crumbling in the face of a truth too powerful to deny. "It's not too late," Luke whispers, taking another step closer. "It's never too late to choose love over fear, hope over despair. It's never too late to be the father Padme believed you could be." And then something extraordinary happens. The Force itself seems to convulse around them, reality bending and twisting as if the very fabric of space and time cannot contain the intensity of the conflict raging within Darth Vader's soul. Luke feels himself being pulled away from the physical world, drawn into something deeper and more fundamental than mere matter and energy. The throne room fades around him, replaced by a vast ethereal space where stars wheel overhead, and the ground beneath his feet shimmers with liquid light. He's no longer standing on durasteel decking, but on what seems to be pure crystallized Force energy, a substance that responds to thought and emotion rather than physical laws. And there, before him, stand 2 figures that make his heart skip a beat. One is Darth Vader, exactly as Luke knows him. Black armor gleaming with malevolent purpose, cape flowing in an unfelt wind, mechanical breathing echoing through this space between worlds. But the other figure is someone Luke has only seen in old holographic recordings and in his dreams. Anakin Skywalker stands tall and proud, dressed in the brown and tan robes of a Jedi Knight. His hair is longer than Luke has ever seen it, flowing freely in the ethereal currents of this Force space. His eyes are blue as summer skies, bright with the passion and heroism that Luke has always imagined in his father. His face is unlined by years of suffering, unmarked by the scars of Mustafar, young and hopeful and alive in a way that Darth Vader's mask could never convey. Both figures turn to face Luke simultaneously, and he realizes with a mixture of wonder and terror that this is no vision or metaphor. Both are equally real, equally his father, representing different aspects of the same tortured soul. And both want something from him. The space around them shifts and changes in response to their presence, sometimes resembling the throne room they just left, sometimes the Jedi temple of Anakin's youth, sometimes the volcanic hellscape of Mustafar, where Anakin Skywalker died and Darth Vader was born. It's as if this realm exists at the intersection of memory and possibility, where past and future collide in an eternal present. "My son," Vader's voice rumbles through his vocabulator, each word heavy with dark promise and terrible certainty. "At last we meet as we truly are, without pretense or deception, here, in this place beyond the physical world. You can see the truth of what power really means." The Dark Lord extends a gauntleted hand toward Luke, and suddenly the ethereal space around them transforms into something magnificent and terrible. Luke sees visions of a galaxy under perfect imperial rule, but not the harsh, oppressive empire he has fought against. This is something different, something that speaks to the deepest desires for order and peace that exist in every thinking being. Worlds that had been consumed by civil war now flourish under strong, decisive leadership. Planets that had struggled with poverty and crime now prosper under the guidance of leaders who have the strength to make hard choices. Systems that had been torn apart by corruption and inefficiency now run like clockwork, every citizen knowing their place and purpose in a greater design. "This is what I can offer you," Vader continues, his presence overwhelming in its certainty and power. "This is what we can build together, Father and Son united in purpose. No more weak republics paralyzed by endless debate. No more corrupt senators serving their own interests, while worlds suffer. No more ineffective Jedi councils too bound by outdated traditions to take meaningful action." Luke watches these visions with growing unease, seeing the appeal in them even as he recognizes their fundamental flaw. The order Vader shows him is undeniably beautiful, undeniably effective, but it's the order of the grave, peace imposed through the elimination of choice rather than the triumph of justice. "I have learned from my mistakes," Vader says, his tone becoming more personal, more intimate. "I was too trusting of Palpatine, too willing to serve another's vision rather than pursue my own. But that was weakness, the remnant of Anakin's naive faith in authority figures. You and I, we need not repeat those errors. We can rule together, as equals, sharing power rather than one serving the other." The visions shift, showing Luke scenes of himself and Vader working in concert to reshape the galaxy. They stand side by side in the Senate, their mere presence enough to silence opposition and ensure that vital legislation passes without the usual political theater. They walk together through the corridors of power, their combined strength making them untouchable, unstoppable. "Look at what we could accomplish," Vader says, gesturing to the visions of their potential future. Wars ended not through negotiation, but through the simple fact that no one would dare oppose our will. Poverty eliminated not through charitable programs, but through the efficient redistribution of resources according to need rather than political influence. Crime reduced to negligible levels because the very thought of lawlessness would be unthinkable in the face of our absolute authority. Luke can see the logic in Vader's arguments, can feel the seductive pull of such absolute solutions to the galaxy's seemingly intractable problems. How many beings have died in the wars between Republic and Separatists? Between Empire and Rebellion? How many more will die if this cycle of conflict continues? Wouldn't it be kinder, ultimately, to end the cycle once and for all? You think of your friends, Vader observes, sensing Luke's internal struggle. You worry about their safety, their freedom. But what good is freedom to the dead? What value does choice have when the choices available are all bad? I offer something better than freedom, my son. I offer security, prosperity, peace. These are not small gifts. The visions become more specific, more personal. Luke sees Han Solo not as a smuggler living on the margins of society, but as the head of a legitimate shipping operation, his skills and courage channeled toward constructive purposes rather than mere survival. He sees Leia not as a rebel princess fighting a hopeless war, but as a planetary administrator, her intelligence and compassion used to actually improve people's lives rather than simply oppose tyranny. They would thank us, eventually, Vader continues, when they see how much better life becomes under proper leadership, when they realize that their previous struggles were meaningless suffering in service of an illusion. Democracy is a beautiful ideal, but it is an ideal that depends on the wisdom and virtue of the masses. And the masses, as history has shown us again and again, are neither wise nor virtuous. But before Luke can respond to these arguments, Anakin steps forward, and his presence is like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Where Vader's power is overwhelming and absolute, Anakin's strength comes from something entirely different. Hope tinged with hard-earned wisdom. Love tempered by understanding of its costs. Don't listen to him, Luke, Anakin says, his voice carrying a warmth that Luke has never heard from Vader's vocabulator. I know his arguments are seductive because I've made them myself. I told myself that I was seeking power to protect the people I loved, to bring order to a chaotic galaxy. But that's not what power does, son. Power doesn't protect. It corrupts. It isolates. It transforms love into possession and protection into control. Anakin raises his own hand, and the space around them transforms again. But these visions are different from Vader's, more complex and nuanced. Luke sees his father as a young man, full of dreams and idealism, working to free slaves on Tatooine. He sees Anakin during the Clone Wars, not as the efficient military commander history remembers, but as a young man constantly struggling with the moral compromises that war demanded. I was like you once, Anakin continues, his eyes filled with pain but also with understanding. I believed that if I just had enough power, I could protect everyone I cared about. I thought that strength was the answer to every problem, that the right application of force could solve any crisis. And that belief, that desperate hunger for control, is what destroyed everything I was trying to save. The visions shift, showing Luke moments from Anakin's life that no history book has ever recorded. Private conversations with Padme about their hopes for the future. Quiet moments in the Jedi Temple where Anakin struggled with his fears and doubts. Times when he chose mercy over efficiency and compassion over expedience. These are the moments that made Anakin Skywalker who he truly was. Not the grand gestures of heroism, but the small, daily choices to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. I fell because I was afraid, Anakin admits, his voice thick with emotion that has been suppressed For 2 decades. Afraid of losing your mother. Afraid of losing Padme. Afraid of being powerless when the people I loved needed me most. And that fear made me easy prey for Palpatine's manipulations. He convinced me that power was the answer, that the dark side could give me what I needed to protect everyone. The visions become darker now, showing Luke the true cost of his father's choices. But these aren't the grand tragedies that everyone knows about, the fall of the Republic or the destruction of the Jedi Order. These are smaller, more personal betrayals. The moment Anakin first lied to Obi-Wan about his relationship with Padme, the times he used the Force to manipulate situations to his advantage, the gradual erosion of his moral compass as he convinced himself that the ends justified increasingly questionable means. Each compromise seemed small at the time. Anakin explains, his voice heavy with regret. Each step down the dark path felt justified, necessary, temporary. I told myself that I would return to the light once I had secured the power I needed. Once I had saved the people I loved. But power doesn't work that way. Luke, it changes you, makes you need more power to solve the problems that your previous use of power created. Luke watches these visions with growing understanding, seeing not just the dramatic moments of his father's fall, but the gradual process by which good intentions were corrupted into monstrous actions. He sees Anakin rationalizing increasingly violent solutions to complex problems. See him growing isolated from friends and mentors who might have guided him back to the light. The younglings in the Jedi Temple, Anakin says, his voice barely above a whisper. They looked at me with trust, with admiration. They saw me as a hero. Someone who would protect them from the dangers of the galaxy. And I cut them down because I had convinced myself that their deaths were necessary for a greater good. That's what power without wisdom leads to, son. That's what happens when you let fear drive your choices. The visions shift again, showing Luke something he has never seen before, Padme's final moments. But this isn't the clinical medical drama he might have imagined. Instead, he sees a woman dying not from physical injury, but from spiritual devastation, watching the man she loves transform into something unrecognizable, something antithetical to everything she believed in. She didn't die from my physical actions, Anakin continues, tears flowing freely down his face. She died because I broke her heart. She died because the man she loved, the father of her children, had become a monster. And I spent 20 years telling myself that it was the Jedi's fault, or Obi-Wan's fault, or anyone's fault but my own. But the truth is simpler and more terrible than that. I killed her with my choices, with my willingness to trade everything I claimed to love for the illusion of control. Luke feels his father's pain like a physical weight, the accumulated guilt and regret of 2 decades pressing down on him. But there's something else there too, something that Vader's arguments had lacked: genuine remorse, the foundation upon which redemption can be built. You don't have to make the same mistakes I did, Anakin says, reaching out to Luke with a hand that is flesh and blood rather than mechanical prosthetics. You don't have to let fear drive you toward the dark side. The galaxy doesn't need another Vader, another tyrant who rules through strength and intimidation. It needs Luke Skywalker, the Jedi, who can find another way. But Vader isn't finished making his case. His presence grows darker, more forceful, radiating waves of dark side energy that make the ethereal space around them tremble. Sentiment and regret. He sneers at his former self. This is exactly why the Jedi fell, why the Republic crumbled into corruption and inefficiency. This is why you failed, Anakin. You clung to emotions, to attachments, to weakness, disguised as virtue. Vader turns back to Luke, his masked visage somehow managing to convey disdain, despite its immobility. He speaks of love and compassion as if they were strengths. But look what they led to. Look at the suffering his good intentions caused. At least I learned from those failures. At least I became strong enough to be effective rather than merely moral. The space around them shifts again. And now Luke sees different visions. The chaos and corruption of the Republic's final years, the ineffectiveness of the Jedi Council as they struggled with problems too complex for their simple moral framework, the millions of beings who died because their leaders were too principled to make the hard choices that could have prevented greater suffering. I offer you something your precious Anakin never could, Vader continues, his voice growing more persuasive, more seductive. I offer you the power to actually make a difference. Not the hollow satisfaction of maintaining your moral purity while the galaxy burns around you, but the real ability to impose order on chaos, to force peace where there was conflict, to save lives through strength rather than watch them be lost through weakness. The visions become more specific, more targeted to Luke's own experiences and fears. He sees the destruction of Alderaan, billions of lives snuffed out in an instant, and Vader shows him how such atrocities could be prevented by a strong leader willing to eliminate threats before they become existential dangers. He sees the Battle of Hoth, rebel soldiers dying in hopeless battle against overwhelming odds, and understands how a swift, decisive victory could have saved lives on both sides. Your friends are dying even now, Vader says, his voice taking on an urgent quality. Above us, rebel pilots throw their lives away in futile gestures of defiance. On Endor, your precious Princess Leia leads soldiers into battle against impossible odds. How many of them will survive this day? How many could be saved if you simply had the strength to end this war decisively? Luke can feel the truth in Vader's words, can sense through the Force the desperate battle raging around the Death Star. X-Wing fighters explode in brilliant flashes as TIE fighters overwhelm them through sheer numbers. Capital ships exchange fire that can crack planets, their crews dying by the thousands in the cold vacuum of space. And on the forest moon below, he can sense Han and Leia fighting desperately against stormtrooper patrols. Outnumbered and outgunned. I can end this today, Vader says, his presence growing more overwhelming with each word. We can end it together. One decisive action, one moment of strength, and this war is over. No more rebels dying for false hope. No more Imperial citizens suffering under the inefficient leadership of bureaucrats and politicians. One gesture of power and peace reigns across 1,000 systems. The temptation is almost overwhelming. Luke can see how it would work, can envision himself and Vader standing together as the new rulers of the galaxy. No more war, no more suffering, no more of the endless political maneuvering that has kept the galaxy in turmoil for his entire life. Just peace, imposed by strength, maintained by power. But what kind of peace? Anakin interjects, his voice cutting through Vader's seductive arguments like a blade through shadow. Peace built on fear isn't peace at all. It's just the illusion of order maintained by the threat of violence. The moment that threat wavers, the moment people think they can resist, the whole structure collapses into something worse than what came before. Anakin steps closer to Luke, his presence radiating warmth and understanding. I know it's tempting to believe that you can control outcomes, that you can use power responsibly where others have failed, but power changes everyone who wields it. Luke, it makes you see people as problems to be solved rather than individuals to be respected. It makes you think you know what's best for everyone else, and it gives you the means to impose your will, whether they agree with you or not. The visions shift again, and now Luke sees a different kind of future. One where he chooses the dark side, not out of malice, but out of love, where he tries to use Sith power for Jedi purposes. At first, it seems to work. Wars end quickly under his iron hand. Crime disappears when criminals know they face certain death. Poverty is eliminated through efficient redistribution of resources. But then Luke sees the hidden costs. He sees himself growing isolated, cut off from the very people he's trying to protect by the necessity of making decisions they cannot understand. He sees the fear in people's eyes when they look at him, not the respect and gratitude he expected, but the desperate compliance of those who know they have no choice but to obey. This is what I became, Anakin says sadly, gesturing to the visions of Luke's potential future. This is what anyone becomes who tries to use dark side power for light side purposes. The dark side doesn't care about your intentions, Luke. It only cares about your choices. And every time you choose power over compassion, strength over wisdom, control over trust, it changes you a little more. The visions become more personal, showing Luke moments from this potential future that mirror his father's own fall. He sees himself lying to friends who question his methods, using the Force to manipulate situations to his advantage, gradually cutting himself off from anyone who might challenge his decisions. He sees the moment when he stops seeing people as individuals and starts seeing them as resources to be managed, problems to be solved, obstacles to be removed. The worst part, Anakin continues, his voice filled with pain, is that you convince yourself you're doing it for them. You tell yourself that they don't understand the bigger picture, that they can't see the necessary complexities of leadership. And maybe that's even true at first, but eventually you stop caring whether they understand. Eventually, their opinions become irrelevant because you have the power to ignore them. Luke watches these visions with growing horror, seeing how easily good intentions can be corrupted by the seductive promise of easy solutions. He sees himself becoming everything he has fought against, a tyrant who rules through fear, who destroys opposition rather than engaging with it, who prioritizes order over justice and efficiency over compassion. But the alternative is chaos. Vader interjects, his voice cutting through Anakin's warnings like a knife. The alternative is watching the galaxy tear itself apart while you maintain your precious moral purity. How many beings died during the Clone Wars because the Jedi were too principled to use effective methods? How many more will die in future conflicts because you're too weak to impose lasting peace? Vader gestures, and the space around them fills with images of suffering, refugee camps filled with beings displaced by war, hospitals overwhelmed with casualties from conflicts that could have been prevented, entire worlds reduced to ash because their leaders chose ideology over pragmatism. This is what your father's way leads to, Vader says, his voice filled with contempt. Endless suffering justified by noble intentions. At least my way offers results. At least when I impose order, it stays imposed. The beings under my rule may not love me, but they live, they prosper, they know peace, they know servitude. Anakin counters. They know fear. They know the constant awareness that one wrong word, one moment of dissent, could cost them everything. That's not life, Vader. That's existence. And it's not sustainable because fear eventually gives way to desperation. And desperate people do desperate things. The two aspects of Luke's father begin to circle each other in the ethereal space, their philosophical differences becoming more heated, more personal. Luke realizes that this isn't just about him anymore. This is about Anakin Skywalker himself, about the fundamental choice between who he was and who he became, between love and fear, between hope and despair. You were weak, Vader snarls at his former self, dark side energy crackling around him like black lightning. Indecisive, sentimental. If you had embraced the power I offer from the beginning, if you had accepted the necessity of strength over compassion, Padme would still be alive. The younglings would have been sacrificed for the greater good. Yes, but millions would have been saved from the chaos that followed. I was human, Anakin replies, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I made them out of love. You make yours out of fear disguised as strength. Which one of us is truly weak? The one who admits his failures and tries to learn from them, or the one who rebuilds himself into a monster to avoid facing the truth? The argument escalates, and suddenly both figures draw lightsabers. Vader's crimson blade springs to life with a sound like tearing silk, while Anakin's blue lightsaber hums with the pure, clean note Luke remembers from his own weapon. The two blades meet in a shower of sparks, and the very fabric of this force space trembles with their conflict. Luke watches in fascination and horror as the two parts of his father battle each other, each representing a different path, a different philosophy, a different way of engaging with the galaxy's problems. Vader fights with mechanical precision, each strike calculated for maximum efficiency, each movement designed to end the conflict as quickly as possible. His style is brutal, effective, overwhelming. Anakin, by contrast, fights with passion tempered by wisdom, his blade work flowing like water, adaptive and responsive rather than rigidly predetermined. He doesn't try to overpower Vader, but instead seeks to redirect his aggression, to find openings in his defenses, to turn the Dark Lord's strength against him. This is what you want? Luke shouts over the sound of clashing lightsabers, his voice echoing through the ethereal space. To destroy each other, to make me choose between love and power, between hope and pragmatism, between idealism and effectiveness. What if there's a third option? What if the answer isn't choosing between you but accepting both? Both figures pause in their combat, turning to look at him with expressions of surprise. Luke steps forward, feeling the weight of destiny and choice pressing down on him like a physical force. You're both right, And you're both wrong. Luke continues, his voice growing stronger as he finds his footing in this impossible situation. Vader, you're right, that the galaxy needs strength, needs decisive action, needs leaders who are willing to make hard choices. But Anakin, you're right, that power without compassion is meaningless, that strength without wisdom leads to destruction, that love is ultimately more powerful than fear. Luke reaches out with the Force, feeling the conflict within his father's soul, the war between these two aspects of the same person. You're not two different people, he says, his voice carrying across the ethereal space like a bell. You're two parts of the same person who lost his way and found it again. Vader represents the strength and determination that Anakin always had. Anakin represents the love and compassion that Vader buried but never truly destroyed. The space around them begins to shift and change as Luke speaks, responding to his growing understanding of the situation. The galaxy doesn't need perfect leaders, he continues. It needs human leaders. Leaders who can be strong when strength is called for, and compassionate when compassion is needed. Leaders who can make hard choices, but who never forget the cost of those choices. Luke looks at both figures, seeing in them the potential for something greater than either could achieve alone. I don't need to choose between Anakin and Vader, he says firmly. I need to choose to be Luke Skywalker, with everything that means, the capacity for great love and righteous anger, for mercy and for justice, for compassion and for strength. He steps closer to both figures, feeling the Force flowing around them like a river of liquid light. And you don't need to destroy each other either. You need to remember that you're both part of the same person, both necessary aspects of who my father truly island Vader. Your strength and determination kept Anakin alive when he should have died on Mustafar. Anakin, your love and compassion are what made that strength worth preserving. The two figures look at each other, then at Luke, and for the first time since this confrontation began, something like understanding passes between them. Vader's lightsaber wavers, its blade flickering as if powered by a failing energy cell. Anakin's weapon remains steady, but his expression softens as he looks at his dark counterpart. The capacity for both light and dark. Luke continues, his voice filled with growing certainty. That's not weakness. That's being human. That's what the Jedi never understood, what the Sith refused to accept. True strength comes not from rejecting half of who you are, but from accepting all of it and choosing, moment by moment, to do what's right. The ethereal space around them erupts with brilliant light as Luke's words resonate through the Force itself. The eternal conflict between light and dark, between love and fear, between hope and despair, suddenly seems less like an irreconcilable contradiction and more like different aspects of the same fundamental truth. Luke feels himself being pulled back toward the physical world, but not before he sees something that fills his heart with joy. Vader and Anakin, no longer fighting each other, but standing together, two aspects of the same soul finally reconciled. The crimson lightsaber in Vader's hand flickers and dies, while Anakin's blue blade grows brighter, more powerful, somehow encompassing both their strengths. The throne room of the Death Star materializes around Luke once again, but everything has changed. Vader's body is no longer motionless on the floor, but rising to his feet, supported by something that seems to come from within rather than from his mechanical systems. The dark side energy that had oppressed the chamber for so long is still present, but it's balanced now by something else. Not the naive optimism of untested youth, but the hard-won wisdom of someone who has touched darkness and chosen light. Emperor Palpatine, who has been watching this internal struggle with growing alarm, raises his hands to unleash deadly Force lightning. His yellow eyes blaze with fury as he realizes that his most powerful servant is slipping from his control. If you will not serve me, then you will die. Palpatine shrieks, blue-white electricity arcing from his fingertips toward Luke, but Vader steps between them. And what happens next is unlike anything the Emperor has ever experienced. The lightning strikes Vader's outstretched hands, but instead of being overwhelmed by it, as he was during their confrontation on Endor in the original timeline, he seems to absorb it, channel it, control it in ways that should be impossible. "You taught me well, my master," Vader says, his voice carrying new harmonics, new depth. The mechanical breathing is still there, but underneath it, Luke can hear something that has been absent for 20 years: humanity. But there was one lesson you never learned, one truth you could never accept. Balance isn't weakness. It's strength beyond your comprehension. The Force lightning intensifies, but Vader doesn't try to resist it or deflect it. Instead, he seems to welcome it, to embrace it, transforming Palpatine's raw malice into something else entirely. The dark side energy flows through him, but it's tempered now by light side wisdom, creating something new and unprecedented. A power that acknowledges both aspects of the Force without being consumed by either. "This is impossible," Palpatine gasps, his attack faltering as he realizes that his own power is being turned against him. The dark side cannot be balanced. It must dominate or be dominated. "That," Vader replies, stepping closer to his former master, "is where you were always wrong." The lightning reverses course, flowing back toward Palpatine with interest. But this isn't simply the Emperor's own power reflected back at him. It's something new, something that combines the strength of the dark side with the wisdom of the light, creating a force that Palpatine's purely Sith philosophy cannot comprehend or counter. Emperor Palpatine's scream echoes through the throne room as he's consumed not by his own malice, but by the balanced power of a man who has finally accepted all aspects of himself. The ancient Sith Lord crumbles to ash and shadow, his body unable to contain the contradiction between his absolute commitment to darkness and the balanced Force energy washing over him. As the Emperor dies, Luke feels a profound shift in the Force itself. The oppressive weight of dark side energy that has hung over the galaxy like a shroud for decades begins to lift. Not because the dark side has been destroyed, but because it's no longer unbalanced, no longer given free rein to dominate and corrupt. Vader turns to Luke, and for the first time in 20 years, Luke can see his father's eyes through the mask. They're still the blue eyes of Anakin Skywalker, but they're changed now, deepened by suffering and wisdom, carrying both the capacity for great love and the understanding of great loss. "Thank you, my son," Vader says, his voice carrying both mechanical authority and human warmth. "You showed me that the choice was never between Anakin and Vader, between light and dark. It was about choosing to be whole, to accept all aspects of myself while consciously deciding how to use that completeness." The Death Star shudders around them as the Emperor's death disrupts power systems throughout the massive space station. But there's no panic in Vader's movements. as he leads Luke toward the shuttle bay. Through the Force, Luke can sense the rebel fleet above them, no longer facing the overwhelming dark side influence that had been emanating from the throne room. The fleet, Luke says, concern for his friends overriding even this momentous reconciliation with his father, is no longer in danger. Vader replies, his connection to the Force allowing him to sense the changing tide of battle. Without Palpatine's influence coordinating the Imperial response, without the trap he had planned, this battle becomes a conventional engagement. And in conventional warfare, passion and commitment often triumph over mere numbers. They board Vader's shuttle and launch from the Death Star, just as the massive space station begins its death throes. But this time, it's not sabotage that destroys the ultimate weapon, but the simple fact that the dark side energy that had held its disparate systems together has been disrupted. Without the Emperor's will to maintain its structural integrity, the artificial moon tears itself apart under the stress of its own contradictions. Luke watches through the shuttle's viewport as the Death Star collapses in on itself, its destruction marked not by the massive explosion he might have expected, but by something stranger and more beautiful. Waves of balanced force energy spreading outward like ripples on a cosmic pond, carrying with them the promise of change, of growth, of new possibilities. In the hours and days that follow, the galaxy struggles to understand what has happened. The Emperor is dead, but the Empire doesn't immediately collapse into chaos. Instead, something unprecedented occurs. Vader, no longer bound by Sith doctrine but still commanding the fear and respect his name carries, works with the Rebel Alliance to establish a new form of government. The first meeting between Vader and the Rebel leadership takes place aboard the Mon Calamari cruiser Home One, and the tension is so thick it could be cut with a lightsaber. Admiral Akbar sits rigidly at the conference table, his large eyes fixed on the Dark Lord who had been their greatest enemy mere days before. General Madine's hand rests near his sidearm, a gesture that doesn't go unnoticed by anyone present. Princess Leia, despite her diplomatic training, can barely contain her mixture of hope and revulsion as she looks at the man who had tortured her, who had frozen Han in carbonite, who had been the instrument of so much suffering. "You expect us to trust you," Leia says, her voice steady. Despite the emotional turmoil, Luke can sense through their newfound familial bond. "You expect us to work with the man who destroyed Alderaan." Vader's response is immediate and unexpected. "I do not expect your trust, Your Highness. I expect your pragmatism. The Emperor destroyed your homeworld, not I. But I was complicit in his reign, complicit in the system that made such atrocities possible. I do not ask for forgiveness, only for the opportunity to help build something better." The admission sends ripples of shock through the assembled rebel leaders. This is not the Darth Vader they have fought against for years, the implacable enemy who never showed doubt or remorse. This is something new, something they don't know how to categorize or respond to. Mon Mothma, ever the diplomat, leans forward. "What exactly are you proposing, Lord Vader?" "A synthesis," Vader replies, his mechanical breathing the only sound in the room for several long moments. The Empire brought order to a chaotic galaxy, but it was order built on fear and oppression. The Republic before it fostered freedom and debate, but it was paralyzed by corruption and inefficiency. Your rebellion fights for justice, but it lacks the infrastructure to govern a galaxy of trillions. He gestures to the viewport, where Imperial and Rebel ships hang in uneasy proximity, their crews uncertain whether they should be preparing for battle or cooperation. What if we could combine the best of all three? Imperial efficiency without tyranny, Republican freedom without chaos, rebel idealism with practical governance. Impossible, General Recon interjects. Those philosophies are fundamentally incompatible. You can't have freedom and control, justice and order, idealism and pragmatism. Luke steps forward, feeling the weight of destiny and possibility pressing down on him. Why not? Why can't we have leaders who are strong enough to make hard decisions but wise enough to make the right ones? Why can't we have a government that protects freedom by being strong enough to defend it? The debate that follows stretches for hours, then days, then weeks. Representatives from across the galaxy arrive to join the discussions. Former imperial governors who had grown disgusted with the Emperor's excesses, rebel cells who had fought for years in the Outer Rim, planetary leaders who had tried to remain neutral in the galactic civil war. The conference room aboard Home One becomes a microcosm of the galaxy's struggles, with every faction trying to advance their vision of what should come next. Some former Imperials argue for a return to the old system, minus the Emperor's worst excesses. Some rebels insist on a complete dismantling of Imperial infrastructure and a return to Republican democracy. Some planetary representatives demand immediate independence and an end to any form of galactic government. Through it all, Vader and Luke work together in ways that surprise everyone, including themselves. When Imperial hardliners try to derail discussions by insisting that alien species are inherently inferior, it's Vader who silences them with a quiet but unmistakable threat. When rebel extremists demand that all former Imperials be tried as war criminals, it's Luke who points out the impracticality and injustice of such sweeping condemnation. "You're asking us to forget 20 years of oppression," argues General Kraken, the head of rebel intelligence. "You're asking us to work with the people who tortured our friends, who bombed our worlds, who hunted us like animals." "No," Luke replies, his voice carrying a maturity that seems to surprise even him. "We're asking you to remember that the alternative to working together is watching the galaxy tear itself apart. How many more worlds burn while we argue about the past? How many more beings die while we try to assign blame?" The breakthrough comes when Admiral Thrawn, the brilliant Chiss strategist who had been one of the Empire's most effective commanders, makes an unexpected appearance. His blue skin and glowing red eyes mark him as one of the few non-humans to achieve high rank in the Imperial hierarchy, and his reputation for tactical genius precedes him. "I have observed this debate with great interest," Thrawn says, his cultured voice cutting through the latest round of arguments. Each faction speaks as if their preferred system existed in isolation, as if the choice were simple. But governance is not art criticism, where one can prefer one style over another based on aesthetic preferences. Governance is engineering, where success is measured by results rather than intentions. He activates a holographic display showing trade routes, resource flows, and communication networks that span the galaxy. The Empire created infrastructure that connects every inhabited system in the galaxy. Hyperspace routes that allow rapid travel between distant sectors. Communication networks that enable instant coordination across vast distances. Industrial complexes that can produce enough food, medicine, and manufactured goods to support trillions of beings. The display shifts, showing the same networks overlaid with data about oppression, forced labor, and authoritarian control. But that infrastructure was built through exploitation and maintained through fear. The question is not whether we should preserve it, but how we can transform it into something that serves beings rather than controlling them. Princess Leia studies the displays with the keen eye of someone who had spent years analyzing Imperial weaknesses. You're talking about fundamental changes to how the galaxy is governed. The kind of reforms that would take decades to implement, assuming they're even possible, which is precisely why we cannot afford to waste time on ideological purity. Vader interjects. Every day we spend debating theoretical frameworks is another day that Imperial warlords consolidate power in the Outer Rim. Another day that essential services break down. Another day that beings suffer from the chaos we've created. The turning point comes when news arrives of a crisis on Malastare. The planet's fuel refineries, essential for powering much of the galaxy's transportation network, have been seized by a former Imperial Moff who is demanding recognition as the system's legitimate ruler. Without Malastare's fuel production, hundreds of worlds will face shortages that could lead to economic collapse and social unrest. This is exactly what we feared, Mon Mothma says, reviewing the intelligence reports. The Empire's collapse is creating power vacuums that opportunists are rushing to fill. If we don't establish some form of legitimate authority soon, we'll face 100 different conflicts as every petty warlord tries to carve out their own territory. The rebel fleet could take Malastare, Admiral Akbar suggests. We have enough ships to overwhelm whatever forces this Moff has assembled. And then what? Thrawn asks. You install a rebel governor? You occupy a planet that supplies fuel to thousands of systems, making yourselves responsible for maintaining production levels while fighting a population that may see you as invaders rather than liberators? The debate over Malastare becomes a test case for the larger questions about galactic governance. Some argue for military intervention, others for diplomatic negotiation, still others for simply allowing local systems to sort out their own problems. But it's Vader who proposes the solution that ultimately carries the day. Send me, he says simply. Not as an Imperial enforcer, not as a rebel commander, but as someone who understands both the necessity of order and the importance of justice. Let me show this Moff, and anyone else who might be watching, that the old ways are finished, that there is a new path forward. The objections are immediate and vociferous. Sending Vader to Malastare could be seen as Imperial aggression, could provoke other systems to rally against what they might perceive as the Empire's return. But Luke supports his father's proposal, and gradually, reluctantly, the other leaders agree to a limited mission. The task force that arrives at Malastare is deliberately small and mixed. A handful of Imperial ships under Vader's command, supported by rebel X-Wings and carrying diplomats from both factions. The message is clear. This is not an invasion, but a demonstration of the new order's commitment to peaceful resolution of disputes. Moff Tarkin, the former Imperial officer who had seized control of Malastare's refineries, initially refuses to even meet with the task force. He broadcasts demands for recognition of his authority, threatens to destroy the refineries if attacked, and calls on other Imperial remnants to support his rebellion against what he terms rebel, alien contamination of Imperial purity. Vader's response is swift and surgical. Rather than launching a full assault on Tarkin's stronghold, He leads a small strike team directly to the Moff's command center. The operation takes less than an hour, with minimal casualties and no damage to the vital fuel production facilities. But it's what happens next that sends shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Instead of executing Tarkin or dragging him away in chains, Vader offers him a choice: face trial for his crimes against the people of Malastare, or accept exile to a remote system where he can live out his days in comfortable obscurity. "You're weak," Tarkin sneers, clearly expecting a swift death. "The old Vader would have killed me without hesitation." "The old Vader," comes the reply, "served a master who ruled through fear. I serve something greater now." Vader's mask turns toward the Moff, and even through the emotionless faceplate, his contempt is palpable. "You have 1 minute to decide." Tarkin chooses exile, and within hours, he's aboard a transport bound for a barely inhabited world on the galaxy's rim. The refineries are placed under joint Imperial Rebel administration, with production quickly returning to normal levels. Most importantly, the intervention demonstrates that the new government has both the strength to act decisively and the wisdom to use that strength proportionally. Word of the Malastare operation spreads quickly, and its effects ripple across the galaxy. Other would-be warlords reconsider their plans for independence, knowing that they face not the inefficient bureaucracy of the Old Republic or the cruel efficiency of the Old Empire, but something new and unpredictable. Planetary governments that had been preparing for extended civil wars instead begin sending delegations to the ongoing Constitutional Convention aboard Home One. The negotiations that follow are unlike anything in galactic history. Representatives from thousands of worlds gather to debate fundamental questions about the nature of governance, the balance between local autonomy and galactic coordination, the rights of individuals versus the needs of society. The diversity of the assembled delegates is staggering. Humans and aliens, former Imperials and lifelong rebels, corporate executives and labor organizers, religious leaders and secular philosophers. Luke finds himself at the center of these debates, not because of any official position, but because of his unique role in bringing together the seemingly irreconcilable factions. His status as a Jedi gives him moral authority, his victory over the Emperor gives him credibility, and his family connection to Vader makes him a bridge between old and new. The fundamental question Luke tells one particularly contentious session is not whether we can create a perfect government. Perfect governments don't exist because perfect beings don't exist. The question is whether we can create a government that improves over time, that learns from its mistakes, that serves its citizens rather than ruling them. The Constitution that eventually emerges from these negotiations is a complex document that tries to balance competing demands and philosophies. It establishes a federal system with significant local autonomy, creates checks and balances between different branches of government, and includes explicit protections for individual rights and freedoms. But perhaps most importantly, it includes something that has never existed in galactic government before: a formal role for Force users as mediators and advisors. The new Jedi Order, rebuilt under Luke's guidance, becomes neither the aloof guardians of the Old Republic nor the hunted outcasts of the Imperial era, but something new: philosopher warriors who serve the cause of justice while remaining accountable to democratic institutions. It's not the restoration of the Republic that many rebels had hoped for, nor is it the continuation of the Empire that Imperial loyalists might have preferred. Instead, It's something new. A system that combines the efficiency and strength of imperial administration with the freedoms and protections that the rebellion had fought for. Luke watches his father navigate this new role and sees the wisdom in the choice he made in that ethereal force space. Sometimes the galaxy needs Anakin's compassion and mercy, his ability to see the best in people and inspire them to greatness. Sometimes it needs Vader's strength and decisiveness, his willingness to make hard choices and enforce necessary order. Most often, it needs both. The transition period proves more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Rebuilding a galaxy-spanning government while maintaining essential services and preventing civil wars requires a level of coordination and compromise that tests everyone involved. There are setbacks, failures, moments when the entire project seems doomed to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The crisis comes 18 months after the Emperor's death, when a coalition of Outer Rim worlds declares independence from the nascent Galactic Federation, led by former Imperial Admiral Zarin and funded by corporate interests that had profited from the old system's inefficiencies. The Free Worlds Alliance claims to represent systems that refuse to submit to what they call rebel imperial collaboration. The secession crisis divides the new government's leadership. Some argue for immediate military action to prevent the Federation from fragmenting before it's fully established. Others insist on negotiation and compromise, even if it means accepting a smaller but more unified government. Still others suggest that perhaps the Outer Rim worlds should be allowed to go their own way, that trying to govern too many diverse systems might be impossible. The debate rages for weeks while the Free Worlds Alliance grows stronger, attracting systems that are unsure about the new government's stability. Pirates and warlords operate freely in Alliance territory, knowing that the fractured political situation makes coordinated response unlikely. Refugee ships flee the Outer Rim, carrying reports of chaos and violence that make galactic headlines. It's Vader who finally cuts through the political paralysis with a proposal that shocks everyone. He volunteers to go to the Outer Rim alone, not with a fleet or an army, but as a single representative of the New Order's principles. This is madness, Admiral Akbar protests. Zarin has at least 2 Star Destroyers and hundreds of fighters. He'll kill you the moment you enter his territory. Perhaps, Vader acknowledges. But if he does, it will prove to the galaxy that the Free Worlds Alliance is built on the same foundation of fear and violence that destroyed the Empire. And if he doesn't, if I can demonstrate that the New Order offers something better than what came before, perhaps we can end this crisis without a war that would kill millions. Luke immediately volunteers to accompany his father, as do several other Jedi and a mixed group of former Imperial and Rebel officers. But Vader refuses all offers of assistance. This must be done alone, he insists. The moment I arrive with an escort, it becomes a show of force rather than a demonstration of principle. The message must be clear. The New Order doesn't rule through intimidation, but through the strength of its ideals. The journey to the Outer Rim takes 3 days in Vader's personal shuttle, with the galaxy watching through holonews coverage. When he arrives at Zarin's headquarters on the industrial world of Bilbringi, he's met by a fleet of warships that could reduce his small vessel to atoms in seconds. Admiral Zarin, Vader, says over an open comm channel that's being broadcast across the galaxy, I request permission to come aboard your flagship. I believe we have much to discuss. The response is immediate and predictable. Demands for surrender, threats of execution, accusations of betrayal and collaboration with alien terrorists. But Vader's reply is calm, patient, almost conversational. I understand your anger, Admiral. I understand your fear. For 20 years, we served an emperor who promised order and delivered oppression. Now you see former enemies working together and assume it must be another form of betrayal. But what if it's not? What if it's something genuinely new? The conversation continues for hours, with Zarin becoming increasingly frustrated by Vader's refusal to respond to threats or insults. Finally, perhaps out of curiosity, or perhaps from a desire to end the stalemate, he grants permission for Vader to board his flagship. The meeting takes place in Zarin's command center, surrounded by Imperial officers who eye Vader with a mixture of reverence and suspicion. These are men and women who served the Empire faithfully, who believed in its mission of bringing order to the galaxy, who find themselves branded as war criminals by the very rebels they fought to protect civilization from. "You were our greatest hero," Captain Neris says, her voice filled with pain and confusion. "You represented everything the Empire stood for. Strength, order, the willingness to make hard choices for the greater good. How could you betray that legacy by working with terrorists and aliens?" Vader's response is not what anyone in the room expects. Instead of defending his choices or attacking theirs, he begins to tell a story they've never heard before. The story of Anakin Skywalker's fall, told not as Imperial propaganda about the weakness of the Jedi, but as a personal account of how fear and anger can corrupt even the best intentions. "I fell to the dark side because I was afraid," he says, his mechanical breathing the only sound in the suddenly quiet command center. "Afraid of losing the people I loved, afraid of being powerless when they needed me most. The Emperor promised me power, promised me the ability to protect what mattered. But power without wisdom, strength without compassion, these things don't protect. They destroy." He looks around the room, seeing his own past reflected in these officers' faces. You joined the Empire because you believed in order, in justice, in protecting civilization from chaos. Those are not evil goals. But the methods we used, the fear we spread, the suffering we caused, that was evil. And I was the instrument of that evil for 20 years. Admiral Zarin interrupts, his voice filled with anger. "So, now you preach to us about morality? You who killed more beings than anyone in galactic history? You who destroyed entire worlds in the Emperor's name?" "Yes," Vader replies simply. "I do preach to you about morality, because I know the cost of abandoning it. I know what it means to convince yourself that the ends justify the means, that a little more cruelty now will prevent greater suffering later. I know, because I lived that lie for 2 decades. The room falls silent again, but it's a different kind of silence now. These are career military officers, people who understand the weight of command and the burden of making decisions that affect millions of lives. And they're hearing something they never expected from Darth Vader: genuine remorse, authentic recognition of failure. The new government isn't perfect, Vader continues. It won't solve every problem or prevent every tragedy, but it offers something the Empire never could: the possibility of growth, of learning from mistakes, of becoming better than what we were. The old empire demanded perfection and punished failure. The new order accepts imperfection and encourages improvement. Captain Nereus speaks up again, but her voice is softer now, less certain. What about the aliens? What about the chaos that will come when inferior species are given authority over their betters? What about them? Vader asks. I have worked alongside beings from dozens of species in the past months. Some are wise, some are foolish, some are brave, some are cowardly, some are honest, some are corrupt, just like humans. The Empire's doctrine of human supremacy was another lie, another way of dividing beings who should have been working together. The conversation continues deep into the ship's night cycle, with other officers joining the discussion. Gradually, grudgingly, some begin to admit that the empire they served had flaws, that the new government might offer improvements. Not all are convinced, but enough doubt has been planted that Zarin's absolute authority begins to crack. The climax comes when news arrives of a humanitarian crisis in the Free Worlds Alliance territory. A plague has broken out on Ryloth, the Twi'lek homeworld, and the local medical infrastructure is completely overwhelmed. Thousands are dying while the Alliance leadership debates whether to request aid from the hated Federation. Here, Vader says, seizing the moment, is a test of our respective philosophies. The old empire would have quarantined the system and let the plague burn itself out, accepting massive casualties to prevent contamination of imperial worlds. Your alliance claims to offer freedom, but what freedom do the dead possess? He activates his comlink, speaking directly to Luke aboard the Federation flagship. My son, there is a plague on Ryloth. The people are dying while their leaders argue about politics. What does the new order offer them? Luke's response comes immediately and without hesitation. Medical ships are already being loaded with supplies and personnel. We'll have a relief fleet there within 18 hours. All beings in the galaxy deserve help when they're suffering, regardless of their political affiliations. The impact on the Imperial officers is immediate and profound. This is not the response they expected from a government they've been told is weak and indecisive. This is decisive action based on moral principle rather than political calculation. Why? Admiral Zarin asks, his voice barely audible. Why help people who have rejected your authority? Because it's the right thing to do, Vader replies. Because power exists to serve beings, not the other way around. Because the moment we start deciding who deserves help based on their political loyalties, we become the same kind of monsters the Emperor was. The Free Worlds Alliance doesn't collapse immediately, but the foundation of its support begins to erode as systems see the practical benefits of Federation membership. When the medical crisis on Ryloth is resolved through swift, effective action by Federation forces, other worlds begin to reconsider their positions. Some Alliance leaders dig in deeper, convinced that any cooperation with the Federation is treason to human supremacist principles. But others, led by officers like Captain Nereus, begin reaching out through back channels to discuss terms for rejoining the galactic community. The process takes months of careful negotiation, with each world's concerns addressed individually rather than through blanket policies. Some systems receive guarantees of local autonomy. Others get economic development packages. Still, others are granted special exemptions from certain federal regulations. It's messy, inefficient, and politically complicated, but it works. The transition isn't easy. There are Imperial hardliners who cannot accept the new reality, who would rather see the galaxy burn than submit to what they see as rebel contamination of their perfect order. There are rebel extremists who refuse to work with anyone who once served the Empire, who see any compromise as betrayal of everything they fought for. But there are also those who recognize the unprecedented opportunity that this moment represents. Admiral Ackbar works alongside Grand Admiral Thrawn to develop new naval doctrines that emphasize protection of civilian populations rather than intimidation. Princess Leia collaborates with former Imperial governors to establish new planetary governments that combine local autonomy with galactic coordination. Han Solo, perhaps surprisingly, proves particularly effective at reaching out to former Imperial pilots and soldiers, many of whom joined the Empire not out of ideological commitment but out of a desire for stability and purpose. His own history as a smuggler and outsider gives him credibility with those who have found themselves on the wrong side of history through circumstances rather than choice. The re-establishment of the Jedi Order becomes one of the most complex and controversial aspects of the new galactic government. Unlike the old Jedi, who operated as an independent organization with vague ties to the Republic, the new Jedi are formally integrated into the federal structure. While maintaining their spiritual autonomy, the debate over this integration is fierce and prolonged. Many former rebels argue that creating any kind of organized Force user group risks repeating the mistakes that led to the rise of the Sith. Senator Rickon, now representing Alderaan's refugee population, voices the concerns of many when he says, "We fought to end rule by those who claimed special authority. How is rule by Force users any different from rule by Sith or Jedi?" Others, particularly those who had witnessed the effectiveness of Luke and Vader's partnership, argue that Force users have unique abilities that make them valuable mediators and advisors. Admiral Ackbar, whose tactical genius had been enhanced by his growing understanding of the Force, becomes an unexpected advocate for formal Jedi involvement in government. The Force is not magic, Ackbar explains to a skeptical Senate committee. It is a tool for understanding patterns, for seeing connections that others miss. In my command of fleet operations, I have learned to sense the intentions of enemy commanders, to feel the flow of battle in ways that purely technological analysis cannot provide. This is not mysticism. It is practical advantage that we would be foolish to ignore. Luke finds himself at the center of these debates, defending a vision of the Jedi that he's still developing himself. The old Jedi had been guardians and warriors, but they had also been isolated from the communities they served. The new Jedi would be something different. Counselors and mediators who lived among the people rather than apart from them. The mistake of the old Jedi, Luke tells the Constitutional Convention, was thinking they could serve the galaxy by remaining separate from it. They became so focused on maintaining their purity that they lost touch with the needs and concerns of ordinary beings. The new Jedi will not repeat that error. The academy that Luke establishes on Yavin 4 reflects this new philosophy in every aspect of its design and curriculum. Instead of the isolated temple that had characterized the old order, the new academy is built as part of a larger community that includes former rebels, ex-Imperials, and civilians from across the galaxy. Students don't just learn lightsaber combat and Force techniques. They study galactic history, political theory, economics, psychology, and dozens of other subjects that prepare them to understand the complex realities of the world they'll serve. They work alongside non-Force users on community projects, learning that their abilities make them different, but not superior. Perhaps most importantly, they learn to question authority, including their own. Where the old Jedi had emphasized obedience to the Council and adherence to rigid codes, the new Jedi are taught to think critically, to challenge assumptions, and to make ethical decisions based on circumstances rather than inflexible rules. The code is a guide, not a law. Luke tells his first class of students, a diverse group that includes humans and aliens, former soldiers and civilians, beings as young as 12, and others well into their middle years. It offers wisdom accumulated over centuries of experience, but it cannot make decisions for you. Every situation is unique. Every choice carries consequences that must be weighed carefully. One of his students, a former Imperial intelligence analyst named Mara Jade, who had discovered her Force sensitivity only after the Emperor's death, raises her hand. But Master Skywalker, if we don't follow the code, how do we avoid making the same mistakes the Sith made? How do we ensure we don't fall to the dark side? It's a question that Luke has wrestled with extensively, and his answer reflects the hard-won wisdom of his confrontation with his father's divided soul. The dark side isn't something that exists outside of us, waiting to corrupt us if we make the wrong choice. It's part of us, part of the Force, part of the natural order. The question isn't how to avoid it, but how to acknowledge it without being controlled by it. He activates his lightsaber, the blue blade humming with contained energy. Anger can fuel injustice, but it can also fuel the fight against injustice. Fear can paralyze us, but it can also warn us of real dangers. Even hate has its place when directed at systems and ideas that cause suffering. The key is understanding the difference between emotions that serve justice and emotions that serve the self. Another student, a young Twi'lek named Alara, who had lost her family in Imperial slave raids, speaks up. What about revenge, Master? The Empire took everything from me. Is it wrong to want those responsible to pay for what they did? Luke considers the question carefully, remembering his own struggles with similar feelings. Wanting justice for those who have been wronged is natural and right. But revenge focuses on causing pain to those who hurt you, while justice focuses on preventing them from hurting others. One serves the past, the other serves the future. The conversation continues for hours, touching on questions that the old Jedi had tried to resolve through simple prohibitions, but which require more nuanced understanding. Can a Jedi love someone without becoming attached? Can they kill in defense of innocence without falling to the dark side? How do they balance individual needs against collective good? These are not abstract philosophical questions for the new Jedi. As the galactic government continues to evolve, Force users find themselves called upon to mediate disputes between worlds, to counsel leaders facing impossible choices, to provide insight into situations where normal diplomatic and political tools prove inadequate. One of the first major tests comes when the agricultural world of Malastare faces a crisis that threatens to destabilize the entire sector. The planet's ecosystem is failing due to centuries of intensive farming, but the crops it produces are essential for feeding dozens of other worlds. Any reduction in production will lead to famine, but continuing current practices will result in ecological collapse. The local government is paralyzed by the scope of the problem, unable to choose between immediate humanitarian concerns and long-term survival. Traditional solutions like importing food from other systems or relocating populations are politically and economically impossible given the scale involved. Luke and 3 other Jedi are sent to mediate, not as outside authorities imposing solutions, but as advisors helping local leaders find their own path forward. The process takes months of careful listening, analysis, and consultation with experts from across the galaxy. The solution they eventually help develop is complex and unprecedented. A gradual transition to sustainable farming methods, supported by technological innovations, combined with temporary food assistance from the federal emergency reserves and new trade agreements that provide alternative economic opportunities for displaced agricultural workers. It's not perfect, Luke admits to the Planetary Council as they review the final proposal. It will require sacrifices from everyone, and there's no guarantee it will work. But it's a plan developed by you for your world, based on your values and priorities. The Force guided us to see possibilities, but you made the choices. The success on Malastare establishes a pattern that the new Jedi Order follows across the galaxy. They become facilitators rather than rulers, advisors rather than commanders, servants of justice rather than enforcers of law. It's a challenging role that requires constant vigilance against the temptation to use their powers to impose solutions rather than guide discovery. Not all missions are successful. The Jedi intervention on Corellia fails when local factions refuse to compromise, leading to a civil war that kills thousands. The mediation between the corporate sector and its workers breaks down when economic interests prove more powerful than moral arguments. These failures weigh heavily on the new Jedi, but they also provide crucial learning experiences. We cannot save everyone, Vader tells Luke after a particularly difficult failure on Nal Hutta, where their attempts to negotiate an end to Hutt slave trading had resulted in increased violence against the slaves themselves. We cannot solve every problem or prevent every tragedy. Our role is to offer alternatives, to show possibilities, to serve as examples of what beings can become when they choose light over darkness. The conversation takes place in Vader's private chambers aboard a Federation cruiser. The first time father and son have been alone together since the confrontation in the Force space. Vader has removed his helmet, revealing the scarred but healing face of Anakin Skywalker. The breathing apparatus is still necessary, but medical advances have reduced its intrusiveness. "I see him in you, you know," Vader says, his voice carrying a warmth that Luke has never heard before. Anakin, the young man who believed he could save everyone, who couldn't accept that some problems don't have solutions. It's a beautiful quality, but it can also be dangerous. Luke studies his father's face, seeing past the scars to the man who had once been the hero of the Republic. "Is that why you fell? Because you couldn't accept limitations?" "Partly," Vader acknowledges. "I was so afraid of being powerless that I gave up everything else in pursuit of power. I convinced myself that if I just had enough strength, enough control, enough authority, I could protect everyone I loved. But power doesn't work that way. The more you have, the more responsibility you bear. And eventually, the weight of all those responsibilities crushes everything you were trying to protect." They sit in comfortable silence for a while, watching stars stream past the viewport as the ship travels through hyperspace. Finally, Luke speaks again. "Do you ever regret not dying on the Death Star?" "Sometimes I wonder if redemption through sacrifice might have been cleaner." Vader considers the question seriously. Cleaner, perhaps, but less useful. Death would have been escape from the consequences of my choices. This path, this attempt to build something better from the ruins of what I helped destroy, this is harder, but it's also more honest. He turns to look at Luke directly. Your generation will face choices that mine couldn't even imagine. The galaxy is changing in ways that go beyond politics or economics. The Force itself is evolving, responding to the new balance we've created. The next generation of Jedi will need to be prepared for challenges that we can't anticipate. The prophecy proves more accurate than either of them realizes. As the new galactic government stabilizes and the Jedi Order grows, unprecedented phenomena begin manifesting across the galaxy. Force-sensitive individuals are being born in greater numbers than ever before. Ancient Jedi and Sith artifacts are resonating with new energies. Some beings who had never shown Force sensitivity suddenly find themselves able to manipulate objects with their thoughts or sense the emotions of others. The changes aren't limited to sentient beings. On worlds with strong Force connections, plants grow faster and stronger. Animals develop enhanced intelligence and emotional complexity. Even technology seems to respond differently, with some devices becoming more efficient, while others fail inexplicably. The phenomenon that attracts the most attention occurs on Coruscant itself, where the ruins of the old Jedi Temple begin to glow with soft, multicolored light. When investigation teams enter the structure, they find that the ancient meditation chambers have somehow restored themselves, complete with furnishings and artwork that had been destroyed during Order 66. The Force is healing, Luke tells the Federal Council when they demand an explanation for these unusual events. For 1,000 years, it was dominated by either rigid light side orthodoxy or destructive dark side chaos. Now, for the first time in galactic history, it exists in balance. That balance is creating new possibilities, new forms of connection between all living things. Some council members find this explanation reassuring, others deeply troubling. Senator Antilles, representing the Alderaanian survivors, voices a common concern. Are we looking at the emergence of a new golden age, or the beginning of chaos that will make the Clone Wars look like a minor skirmish? Both. Vader answers from his position as Special Advisor on Force Affairs, a role created specifically to bridge the gap between the Jedi Order and the civilian government. Change always carries the potential for both creation and destruction. Our responsibility is to guide these developments in constructive directions while remaining vigilant against their misuse. The establishment of Force monitoring stations throughout the galaxy becomes one of the new government's highest priorities. These facilities, staffed by teams of Jedi and civilian scientists, track the emerging phenomena and develop protocols for responding to potentially dangerous manifestations. The work proves both fascinating and challenging. On Dantooine, Force-sensitive crystals begin growing in patterns that seem to respond to the emotional states of nearby beings. On Dagobah, the swamp itself becomes a kind of living meditation chamber, where visitors report profound spiritual experiences. On Korriban, the ancient Sith tombs show signs of neutralizing, their dark energies transforming into something more balanced. But perhaps the most significant development occurs in the unknown regions, where long-range scouts discover an entire star system that seems to exist partially outside normal space-time. Ships entering the system report time dilation effects, encounters with beings that claim to be ancient Jedi and Sith working together, and technologies that operate on principles unknown to galactic science. We're not just rebuilding civilization, Luke realizes as he reviews reports from across the galaxy. We're witnessing the emergence of something entirely new. The Force isn't just balanced now. It's evolving, becoming something that incorporates both light and dark, while transcending the limitations of either. The implications are staggering. If the Force itself is changing, then everything built on previous understanding of its nature may need to be reconsidered. The Jedi Code, Sith philosophy, even basic assumptions about the relationship between power and responsibility may all be obsolete. This is why the choice you made in the Force space was so important. Vader tells Luke as they review the latest intelligence reports. You didn't just save my soul or defeat the Emperor. You fundamentally altered the nature of the Force itself, created the conditions for this evolution to occur. Luke feels the weight of that responsibility, but also the excitement of unlimited possibility. What do we do with it? How do we prepare for changes we can't even imagine? We do what we've always done, Vader replies, his scarred face showing something that might be called peace. We choose to serve life rather than death, growth rather than stagnation, love rather than fear. The specific forms that service takes may change, but the fundamental choice remains the same. As years pass and the new galactic civilization continues to evolve, the wisdom of that philosophy becomes increasingly apparent. The beings who embrace change and growth thrive in the new environment, while those who cling to old certainties and rigid structures find themselves increasingly isolated and irrelevant. The former empire's authoritarian structures collapse not through military defeat but through simple obsolescence. When beings have access to Force-enhanced communication and transportation, when they can sense deception and manipulation directly, when they feel connected to the suffering and joy of others across the galaxy, traditional forms of oppression become impossible to maintain. Similarly, the old republic's inefficient democracy gives way to new forms of governance that incorporate direct empathic feedback between leaders and citizens. Politicians can no longer hide behind rhetoric and false promises when their constituents can sense their true intentions and emotional states. The transformation isn't without challenges. Some beings find the new level of interconnectedness overwhelming, leading to psychological disorders that require entirely new forms of treatment. Others become addicted to the enhanced sensory experiences that Force-sensitive environments provide. Still, others attempt to use the new phenomena for personal gain, creating novel forms of crime and exploitation. But overall, the changes prove beneficial. Wars become virtually impossible when potential combatants can feel their enemy's pain and fear as their own. Environmental destruction ends when beings experience the suffering of damaged ecosystems directly. Social inequality diminishes as the artificial barriers between different groups become increasingly meaningless in the face of universal empathic connection. The Jedi Order adapts to these changes by becoming less of a separate organization and more of a guiding philosophy that anyone can adopt. Formal training continues at academies throughout the galaxy, but the basic principles of Force awareness spread far beyond those institutions. Everyone is Force-sensitive now, Luke observes to his father as they watch a group of children on Naboo unconsciously collaborating to build elaborate sand castles that seem to defy gravity. The distinction between Jedi and civilians is becoming meaningless. As it should be, Vader replies, his breathing apparatus barely audible over the sound of children's laughter. The Force was never meant to be the exclusive domain of a chosen few. It belongs to all life, connects all beings. We were simply the first to recognize and develop that connection consciously. The final test of the new order comes 25 years after the Emperor's death, when the galaxy faces its first major crisis since the establishment of the Federation. A plague unlike anything in recorded history spreads through the core worlds, causing not death but a form of madness that makes victims completely empathic, unable to distinguish between their own emotions and those of everyone around them. Traditional medicine proves useless against the condition, and the plague spreads faster than quarantine measures can contain it. Within months, billions of beings are affected, and the social and economic systems of entire sectors begin to collapse as people become unable to function in their normal roles. The crisis threatens to undo everything the new government has accomplished, but it also provides an opportunity to demonstrate the strength of the principles it was built on. Instead of imposing martial law or abandoning affected populations, the Federation responds with an unprecedented mobilization of resources and personnel. Jedi work alongside medical researchers to understand the plague's Force-related aspects. Former Imperial administrators use their organizational skills to coordinate relief efforts. Rebel veterans draw on their experience with desperate situations to maintain morale and hope. The solution, when it comes, reflects the collaborative nature of the new order. The plague turns out to be not a disease but an evolutionary leap, a rapid acceleration of the empathic development that had been occurring gradually across the galaxy. The madness is actually a transitional state that, with proper guidance and support, leads to enhanced consciousness and deeper connection to the Force. We're witnessing the birth of a new form of sentient life. Luke explains to the emergency session of the Federal Council, these beings aren't sick, they're evolving. Our job isn't to cure them, but to help them adapt to their new capabilities. The process takes years and requires fundamental changes to how society operates. Work, relationships, governance, even basic concepts of individual identity have to be reconsidered in light of the new empathic reality. But the result is a civilization unlike anything that has existed before. A truly unified galactic community where the suffering of one is felt by all and the joy of one enriches everyone. Looking back on that pivotal moment in the Force space when he chose integration over division, Luke realizes that his decision was just the beginning of a process that continues to unfold. The choice between Anakin and Vader, between light and dark, between love and power, hadn't been resolved by picking a side. It had been transcended by embracing the complexity and contradiction that defines all conscious existence. You did well, my son, Vader tells him during one of their regular conversations, his voice now carrying only faint traces of mechanical augmentation. Medical advances and Force healing have gradually restored much of his organic function, though he chooses to retain some of the prosthetics as reminders of the choices that brought him to this point. We did well, Luke corrects, looking out at a galaxy transformed beyond recognition, yet somehow more true to its fundamental nature than ever before. All of us, together, even the mistakes, even the failures, they were all part of the pattern that led here. The Force flows around them, through them, connecting them to the vast web of consciousness that now spans the galaxy. In that flow, Luke can sense echoes of the eternal questions that had driven his father's fall and redemption. How do we protect what we love? How do we serve the greater good without losing our individual humanity? How do we balance strength with compassion, justice with mercy, order with freedom? The answers haven't become simpler, but they've become more nuanced, more accepting of contradiction and complexity. The galaxy has learned to live with questions that don't have perfect answers, to make choices while acknowledging their costs, to serve ideals while accepting the reality of limitations. Perhaps that's the greatest legacy of the battle for Luke's soul. Not the victory of light over dark or the triumph of any particular philosophy, but the recognition that wisdom lies not in choosing sides, but in accepting the full complexity of existence and choosing moment by moment to serve love rather than fear, growth rather than stagnation, connection rather than isolation. In the end, the Force itself had been transformed by Luke's choice, becoming not a tool for imposing will, but a medium for sharing understanding, not a source of power over others, but a foundation for connection with all life. And in that transformation, the galaxy had found something it had never possessed before: true peace, not as the absence of conflict, but as the presence of harmony between all the diverse, contradictory, beautiful elements that make up the cosmic community of conscious beings. That's our theory. The Star Wars universe is a galaxy filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey to a galaxy far, far away, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. The old Jedi feared emotion. Luke tells his first class of students, a mix of former rebels, ex-Imperials, and beings who had hidden their Force sensitivity for decades. They thought that feeling led inevitably to the dark side. But emotion isn't the problem. Uncontrolled emotion. Emotion without wisdom. Emotion that drives you to harm others. That's what leads to darkness. He looks around the room, seeing faces marked by war and loss, but also by hope. The new Jedi don't fear their feelings. We acknowledge them, understand them, and choose consciously how to act on them. Anger at injustice can fuel the fight for justice. Fear for those we love can motivate us to protect them. Even hate, properly channeled, can give us the strength to oppose that which truly deserves opposition. One of his students, a former Imperial officer who had deserted after witnessing the destruction of Alderaan, raises her hand. "But Master Skywalker, isn't that the same justification the Sith use? They claim their emotions make them strong." Luke nods, acknowledging the validity of the question. The difference is in what we choose to do with that strength. The Sith use their emotions to justify taking what they want, controlling others, imposing their will regardless of the cost. The new Jedi use their emotions to understand what needs to be done and find the wisdom to do it in the right way. He activates his lightsaber, the blue blade humming with contained energy. This weapon can cut through durasteel, deflect blaster bolts, even block Force lightning. But its true power isn't in its blade. It's in the discipline of the one who wields it. The conscious choice to use this incredible capability only when necessary, only in the right way, only for the right reasons. The lightsaber disappears as Luke deactivates it. That's what the Force is, ultimately. It's not a tool for imposing your will on others. It's a way of understanding your place in the larger pattern of existence, of seeing how your choices affect not just yourself, but everyone around you. And with that understanding comes responsibility. Years pass, and the galaxy slowly heals from the wounds of decades of conflict. The new government, formerly called the Galactic Federation, proves remarkably stable. It has the strength to prevent the kind of large-scale wars that had plagued the Republic's final years, but it also has built-in protections against the kind of tyrannical overreach that had characterized the Empire. Luke often reflects on the moment in the Force space when he chose not to pick between his father's two aspects, but to accept both as necessary parts of a complete person. He sees that choice reflected throughout the galaxy now. Former enemies working together, different philosophies finding common ground, strength and compassion existing side by side rather than in opposition. Vader, for his part, seems to have found a kind of peace that had eluded him for decades. He still wears the mask and the armor, still speaks through the vocabulator that had become his voice for so long. But those who know him can sense the difference, can feel the balance that now exists, where once there had been only pain and rage and desperate hunger for control. Do you ever regret it? Luke asks his father one day as they stand together on the observation deck of a star destroyer, watching repair crews work to rebuild a world that had been devastated by Imperial strip mining operations. Which part? Vader asks, his mechanical breathing steady and calm, not choosing one side or the other, not becoming fully light or staying dark. This middle path we've found. Vader is quiet for a long moment, watching the work proceeding below them. Beings from dozens of species work side by side, former Imperials and former rebels, united in the common cause of restoration and renewal. I regret many things, Vader finally says. I regret the pain I caused, the lives I took, the fear I spread across the galaxy. I regret the years I spent as Palpatine's enforcer, convincing myself that order imposed through terror was better than chaos. But this path we've chosen, this balance between strength and compassion, no, I don't regret that. He turns to look at Luke, and even through the mask, his father's presence radiates something that might be called contentment. For the first time in decades, I am whole, not perfect, not without flaws or struggles, but complete. The man who loved Padme and the man who served the Emperor are both part of who I am, and I no longer need to choose between them. Luke nods, understanding. Through the Force, he can sense his father's internal state, can feel the way Anakin and Vader have integrated into something new and unprecedented. It's not the erasure of Darth Vader that some might have hoped for, nor is it the complete victory of the dark side that Palpatine had sought. It's something more complex and, ultimately, more human. The younglings you train, Vader continues, they will face the same choice that we did. Not between light and dark, but between wholeness and fragmentation, between accepting all aspects of themselves and trying to reject the parts that frighten them. Your example, our example, shows them that it's possible to acknowledge darkness without being consumed by it, to embrace light without becoming naive about the realities of the galaxy. As the years continue to pass, this philosophy spreads beyond the Jedi Order and into the broader culture of the Galactic Federation. Citizens learn that it's possible to criticize their government without being labeled traitors, to support their leaders without abandoning critical thinking, to love their worlds and species without hating others. The galaxy is not perfect, could never be perfect. There are still conflicts, still disagreements, still moments when difficult choices must be made, and someone must bear the cost of those choices. But there's something different now, something that hadn't existed during the Republic's corruption or the Empire's oppression. Hope tempered by wisdom, strength guided by compassion, power balanced by responsibility. Luke often thinks about that moment in the Force space when everything could have gone differently. If he had chosen Vader's path, the galaxy might have known peace, but it would have been the peace of the grave. Order imposed through fear. If he had chosen purely Anakin's way, there might have been freedom, but without the strength to protect that freedom from those who would exploit it. Instead, he chose the harder path, integration rather than selection, balance rather than extremism. The acknowledgement that true wisdom comes not from rejecting difficult truths, but from finding ways to live with contradiction and complexity. When new students join the Jedi Academy, Luke tells them the story of his father's redemption, but not as a simple tale of good triumphing over evil. Instead, he explains it as a lesson about the nature of choice, about the possibility of change, about the way that even the darkest individuals can find their way back to light without having to pretend that the darkness never existed. Your father was a great Jedi, young students often say, having heard the stories of Anakin Skywalker's heroism during the Clone Wars. Yes, Luke always replies. And he was also Darth Vader, one of the most feared Sith Lords in galactic history. Both things are true. Both things are part of who he was, part of what shaped him into the man who helped us build the world you're growing up in. The students often look confused by this apparent contradiction, and Luke smiles when he sees that confusion. It means they're beginning to understand that the universe is more complex than simple stories of heroes and villains, that real people contain multitudes, that redemption doesn't mean erasing the past but learning from it. The Force doesn't choose sides. Luke continues. It's simply island light and dark, creation and destruction, love and fear. All of these are part of the same cosmic pattern. Our job as Jedi isn't to eliminate the dark side, but to understand our relationship to it, to choose consciously how we engage with both aspects of the Force. Years later, when historians try to understand this period of galactic history, they struggle to categorize it. It's not the restoration of the Republic, not the continuation of the Empire, not the victory of the rebellion or the triumph of order. It's something new, something that defies easy classification. Some call it the Great Balance. Others, the synthesis period. But Luke prefers to think of it simply as the time when the galaxy learned that false choices, the illusion that complex problems have simple solutions, had been one of the great sources of suffering throughout history. The choice between freedom and order, between strength and compassion, between idealism and pragmatism, these had been presented as irreconcilable opposites for so long that beings had forgotten it was possible to choose both. Luke's father had shown, through his own journey from light to dark and back to balance, that integration was not only possible, but necessary. In the end, perhaps that's the greatest lesson of Vader and Anakin's fight for Luke's soul, that the soul itself is large enough to contain contradictions, strong enough to survive internal conflict, wise enough to find synthesis where others see only opposition. The galaxy had been torn apart by those who insisted on choosing sides. It was healed by those who chose instead to be whole. That's our theory. The Star Wars universe is a galaxy filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey to a galaxy far, far away, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.